Yeah. Councilmember Giroux.
Here.
Councilmember Nichol.
Here.
Councilmember Perstuck. Here. Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Here.
Mayor Boyle.
Here. Okay, if you could all please rise, we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, public communications. I understand we have someone here that'd like to address the council. Hello.
Hello, Council. My name is Steve Wood, and I'm on the city's new DEI committee, and I'm here to talk about item number 2 on our guidelines for discussion at DEI committee meetings. Be inclusive to all groups, seek to hear, and be responsive to all voices. And one of the groups that I represented has been coaches in El Segundo, has been about kids' youth sports, and that's something that I was criticized for in the last DEI meeting last week. I was defamed by a group in town during our July meeting for pointing out during our consultants' DEI training on the July meeting called Unconscious Bias Against Women, that conscious bias is just as damaging to girls and women when it comes to allowing biological boys and men to compete. Instead of following our committee's own training on why we need to be inclusive, that all voices need to be heard, that some of the training we've had even says we have to have compassion for even rapists and murderers. Call me by all my names. And that includes training that we've had that everyone, including all colorblind people, are racist. Our committee refuses to allow advocates for women and girls athletes, me, to coexist with those advocating for transgender athletes. The verbiage of most of the 10 letters that were submitted by a group in town was pretty much all the same terms and everything, asking me to resign or be fired. My warnings that we risk diminishing our DEI committee mission, goals, and objectives unless we be more inclusive, i.e. by including conservative Black and conservative Hispanic spokespeople, are met with disparaging rhetoric, with comments that there are none who are worthy. I'd like to retract my statement that I like our DEI training because it's been proven to be nothing but hypocritical. It pretty much is like the Stop the Hate group. It only applies to one side of the equation. Stop criticizing people who have opposite points of view. I printed up, and I'll actually email Tracy, how transgender athletes are impacting girls and women sports. Just one of many articles. That science says testosterone, which males get massive doses of beginning at puberty, make men bigger, stronger, and faster. It is easier for men to add muscle mass. Men have larger hearts and greater lung capacity, among other advantages. I wish transgenders no ill will, but I want there to be a position on the DEI committee that someone who advocates for women and girls should be allowed to coexist with those who are advocating for transgenders to compete against girls and women. This differential isn't the result of boys and men having a male identity, more resources, better training, or super discipline. According to someone from the Duke Law School has written, it's because they have an androgenized body. When women and girls object and point out the massive biological differences in strength and speed between men, boys, and girls are massive and real, they are called bigots. Connecticut athletes have filed a federal lawsuit under Title IX to protect the rights of girls and women, fair competition on a level playing field. I just want to say, please don't let our DEI committee turn their backs on girls and women. This has nothing to do with gender identity. This is about fair play. We are going to have to take a stand, men's feelings or women's rights. Yeah, there needs to be a voice on the DEI committee. We need to follow the direction of why you formed the committee, to have everyone's voices heard. So I'd like to say thank you for serving our town, and your wisdom and what we do on this issue would be most appreciated. But I'm sure you're going to start having people from a group in town who are going to do what they did in that meeting. Sorry?
Your time is up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for...
Thank you, Coach Wee.
Thank you.
Anyone else here for public comments? No? Okay, we're on to item 1. Review potential revenue, taxes, and fees, enhancement options, and receive direction from City Council on whether to pursue any of the potential revenue measure options. Yeah, I see Mr. Mitnick, who will present. I'm assuming Joe Lilio.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Your Chief Financial Officer, Joe Lilio, will give the report. I'll tee it up to talk about the first few slides, so Joe can. So as a reminder, why are we here? Why are we having this study session? Well, these are the key points. Why are we here? Then there will be the review of potential revenue enhancement options, and then at the end, for council to ask questions, and then if you have any direction to provide us for future work, that will be the time. Okay, next one. All right, so why are we here? In your 3-year strategic plan, under Goal 5, under fiscal sustainability, Joe, can we go to the next one? There are several components within that goal that deal with revenues. For example, on the screen, you see it highlighted. Look at revenue from the golf course, continue on a sustainable financial path, solve future structural deficits, maintain reserves, bring proposed business license tax to City Council for future ballot, master fee schedule, water wastewater rate study, and the list goes on with items involving revenues. We've chipped away at many of these items. To a large extent, the last remaining item involving revenues is this discussion here. Okay, so council, there are funding needs, as with most, if not all, local governments. And for El Segundo, the funding needs are on 2 levels. On the first level, it's large, or not just large, but capital projects, one-time capital projects to build things, to rehab buildings, et cetera. And then there are also operational needs. So one-time capital needs, the plunge rehab, for example, that's on your agenda later this evening. It's a large capital project. Recreation Park Needs Assessment, that report is just about done. It'll be in front of you, I believe, at our next City Council meeting. In that report, it identifies well over $10 million worth of needed projects. Facilities Needs Assessment, that's been in front of the council already. There's several $1 million worth of facility needs throughout the community involving all of our departments. In addition, there are a variety of other public infrastructure projects such as streets, roads, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, the typical bread and butter of public infrastructure. These are just samples of one-time capital needs. We've also provided for you the one-page summary that's in your budget book. At the end of the capital improvement section, there's a one-page summary of the capital projects and the needs over the next several years. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to turn it over to Joe now. One of the slides I think Joe will get to is also on the other side, not just building things or rehabbing projects, but then how do you ensure there's funds to maintain the recurring operations? That's it for the city manager's comments. Now I'm turning over to Joe. He'll walk you through. It is suggested, council, you allow Joe to go through the different revenue options, and then when he's done with everything, so you can absorb the big picture, then come back and ask questions if you have any about each source. So thank you.
So good evening, Mayor Boyles, Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel, and City Council members. Before I start my presentation, I will be going over several options. These are just examples, so very high level. So what you see in the presentation and what you see before you in the staff report is by no means what we're saying we would bring if council would say move forward with business license tax, for example. What's in that staff report is not what would be brought before you. We would actually go back, research all the pertinent information we needed to do and bring back a comprehensive tax measure before you. So I just want to reiterate that what's in here is just something that we can go off of so we can have some type of idea what we're talking about. So defining the fiscal issue. So I did present last council meeting the fiscal year end on audited numbers, and there we did see that there was a $22 million loss in revenue between the peak of our revenues in 2019 and where we ended in 2021. So that $21 million decline in revenue is real. It was a real loss of revenue to the city. Unfunded infrastructure, as Mr. Mitnick referenced, there was a 2018 facilities needs assessment that was done back in 2018 that identified $40 million. Today, that number would be much higher, obviously because construction costs and inflation have increased. The rec park assessment that is currently underway, it will be finished very soon. That will be several million to tens of millions of dollars. Annual ongoing need of about $2 million in street and sidewalk improvement and repairs, and replacement costs for new facilities. So as the city constructed facilities in the past, we did not set up a facility replacement fund. That's something that I'm recommending. I will be drafting a policy and bring it to council in the future very soon. And for instance, like the plunge, if we move forward with constructing a new plunge, we need to set up the replacement costs funding for it each year as that asset depreciates. So that way, when the asset is fully depreciated, there's a funding source there to replace it. That's something the city has not done in the past.
Joe, quick question. That $40 million from 2018, wasn't that inclusive of some of the projects that we've completed? That was inclusive of the 3 parks and some of the fire station and police department improvements we've completed. So aren't there some of those items that have come off of that?
So the park items, I'm not sure if the park items were all on there or not. I know there were many park items that were not. That's why we're doing this recreation park assessment study.
Oh, no, I meant the Acacia, Washington, and Valley Park, I think were on there.
Yes.
In the
yes, and
women's room at the police department and those things, I think were.
Correct, and then the police and fire improvements were on there as well. Police and fire improvements are a very small dollar portion of the overall 40 million, but yes, you are correct, Mayor Pro Tem. Some of those items were on there. Okay, further defining the fiscal issue, there's recurring operational and maintenance needs that are unfunded, recurring costs associated with public safety, unfunded technology needs. So for instance, our current computer system that's for finance, HR, all of our internal, what's called an ERP system, that was designed and implemented in the early 2000s, I believe 2003, 2004. It's outdated technology. That needs to be replaced. Many cities have recently done that. For instance, City of Burbank, City of Manhattan Beach have recently implemented new ERP systems. It's anywhere from $1.5 million to $3 million for a new ERP system. Plus, there's other unfunded technology needs. Ensure fiscal sustainability moving forward for these unknown things. For instance, like the pandemic we went through, future recessions that we could be going through. Also to ensure healthy reserves. Okay, so total unfunded fiscal need for the city over the next 20 to 30 years is estimated between 150 and $200 million. That would be, if you broke it down, $5 to $10 million per year. So $5 million on the conservative side, that's if you take the 150 million, divide it over 30 years, or if you take the 200 million, divide it over 20 years, you come up with 10 million. So that's where the range comes from. Not factored in the above discussion is unfunded labor negotiations. So that's not in there. Any future negotiations with labor groups. And that fiscal impact, of course, is unknown. So this was a slide that was presented to council, the last council meeting for fiscal year end. Again, that's that delta I talked about, the 80.2 million where we ended in 2019. We ended in 2021, 61.7 million, but where we would have ended if the recession, if COVID did not happen and the following recession did not incur, we do have a loss of about $22.3 million. So that 80 million would have been 84 million today. This is, again, a projection without including any capital funding, without any MOU contract negotiations moving forward. This includes existing contracts, but not expired contracts. So this is where we are today, and again, taking the status quo and applying a 2% factor to the expenditure line and a 1.5% increase to revenues. So some of the main items I will be going over with you for the potential revenue enhancement options are a sales tax, local use and transaction tax. I know we have Measure C that passed in 2020. However, that has not been activated. And the concept behind that was if LA County places a local sales tax on the countywide ballot, our Measure C, which is 3/4 cents, will be enacted. That hasn't happened yet, and I'm not sure that ever will happen. I'm going to get into subsequent slides why. We have almost 60% of cities in LA County that already have a local tax. So the capacity for LA County to add a local sales tax right now, it's diminishing. Their returns are diminishing because 60% of local municipalities already have a local tax. So that cap of 10 1/4 is already maxed out in 60% of LA County cities. I'll be going over utility users tax, a parking tax, business license tax, cannabis tax, and other options. Okay, so for the local sales tax, an additional tax levy on top of the 1% Bradley Burns local sales tax. So right now, all municipalities in the state of California get 1% wherever you are. So right now, El Segundo is getting 1% of the 9.5% that's assessed right now in El Segundo. That's called the 1% Bradley Burns tax that the state distributes to all municipalities. Authorized by, so local sales tax is authorized by California Constitution, Article 13, Section 25.5A6. It does require 75% of the governing body approval to place that measure on the ballot. So again, City Council wouldn't be approving the tax, you're approving the ballot measure, and you do need 75%, which would be 4 out of the 5 council members. So maybe levied as a general tax, that means unrestricted, and that's how we have Measure C that passes. Unrestricted if that ever does get activated, which in my opinion, I feel that there's, again, that diminishing return for LA County. I'm not sure they ever will place another local sales tax on a ballot unless the California state legislature raises the ceiling of the 10 1/4%. So a general tax, which is unrestricted for the general fund, requires approval of the voters, 50% plus 1. Or you may levy a special tax. So that's restricted for specific use. That requires 2/3 of voter approval if that's on the ballot. And restricted uses, some examples are, you can say I'm doing a local sales tax only for capital infrastructure. If you place it on the ballot that way, it requires 2/3, and that revenue is restricted only for capital and infrastructure, and it has to be reported each year to the voters what those funds are being used for. Parks, public safety, those are some other examples of restricted use. And then the local sales tax can be in perpetuity, which means there is no sunset provision, or you can add a sunset provision. And just some examples, if council was interested in moving forward with that, the tax can be levied in 1/8%. So that's 1.5 million for every 1/8%, that's 0.125%. 1/4% would generate about 3 million, 0.5% would generate 6, and 3/4 would generate about 9 million per year. So I already kind of touched on this, that the cap in LA County is 10.25%. Different counties, believe it or not, have different caps. LA County is one of the highest at 10.25. Here's the existing sales tax rate structure within El Segundo right now. So
Can you go back one slide, Joe?
yes, sir.
Which are the ones that don't count?
I'm sorry?
All right, that's all.
Okay, here's the existing sales tax rate structure in El Segundo. You can see, the city does get 1% to the general fund, and the state gets 6.25, and then the county 2.25. Any specific questions on any of those measures?
Joe, can you clarify the 1/4% that goes to the county? Does that go to MTA or LA County? Then could you explain the voter-approved LA County taxes A through H? I think that'd be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. So the voter-approved LA County taxes, Prop A. Let me get my notes out here.
But A was done in 76, went into effect 80, so, and then C was done later. Those go to MTA. That's 1 cent. But R, M, and H, those are specific.
Right, so we have Prop A, which is the 1/2 cent. That became effective in 1980 with no sunset provision. Metro returns 25% of the Prop A tax collected in the city back to the city. So only 25% of what's collected actually goes back to cities for Prop A. Prop C is a 1/2 cent that became effective in 1990 with no sunset provision there. And Metro returns about 20% of Prop C funds back to the city. We have Measure R, that became effective July 1st, 2009, has a sunset provision of June 30, 2039. So you got many years before that sunsets. So that's also a transportation and roads measure. City does receive funding on an annual basis from the county on that. Measure M.
But the funding is based on grants, it's not a set allocated amount, so.
Correct, that's why I don't have a set percentage for that one. That is correct, Mayor. Measure M, it's a 1/2 cent. That became effective July 1st, 2017. Again, that one has no sunset provision. That's, again, for transportation and roads. El Segundo was fortunate enough to get a large grant with the help of the COG to help with one of our large projects that's coming up. Measure H is a 1/4 cent, and that became effective October 1st, 2017. And that was promoted to help fund homelessness, and it was sold as to eradicate homelessness. I'm not sure how effective it has been, but it's a 1/4 cent, and El Segundo has gotten anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 a year from Measure H.
Does that one sunset? I don't recall.
So that one does have a sunset provision of September 30, 2027. Okay, any other questions on this slide? Okay. So within LA County, there's 88 incorporated cities. 51 cities as of March 2021 have a local sales tax. So it's about 58% of cities, and there's several cities in the pipeline that are anticipating to put something either on the June ballot or the November ballot in 2022. Attached is Exhibit B. So in your packet, You have Exhibit B, and that details the listing of cities within LA County and throughout the state of municipalities that have a local sales tax transaction. So the options here, and at the end of, after I go through each one, I'm going to come back to this discussion at the end with council. So the options here are leave Measure C unchanged. Basically, that would result in no actively assessed local sales tax. Or 2, direct staff to look into modifying Measure C and enact either a general or special tax, and at what percent, and whether you want a sunset provision or not. And again, we'll come back to these to this discussion.
Joe, I just need one more clarification. You mentioned a couple slides earlier that the max cap rate for sales tax, is that from the state, is 10.5%?
10.25 for LA County.
10.25 for LA County. So that basically means that any, let's just say, sake of argument, you know, right now we're at 9.5. We put through a 3/4. Let's just say, just sake of argument, that's 10.25. So we're saying that nothing else can ever bring it up above 10.25, no matter what LA County puts on any of their ballots, any election going forward. We're maxed out.
The county and state can ask for that to be raised, that 10%.
But they would have to ask for it to be raised in order to accommodate.
So
But
unless,
the legislature alone can make that decision.
Okay,
And by the way, it's never gone backwards.
of course, right. Okay, so basically there's a 3/4% delta there.
that is correct. And I'll give you an example. Measure H that passed in, what was it, 2017, 2018. There were several cities within LA County that were already at the 10.25. Santa Monica was one of them. So Measure H is not assessed in Santa Monica, but they receive proceeds from Measure H from the county, so.
It made perfect sense for Santa Monica to vote for Measure H because it was them charging us money.
Correct.
To that, with our Measure C, there were rumblings of counties challenging cities' contingent sales taxes like that. Do we know if any of those challenges have gone forward?
Not that I'm aware of. I know of, there's one other city that passed a similar measure. So we were the first city to do such, and then Beverly Hills reached out to us about a year after our measure passed, and they enacted a similar measure that passed by the voters. City of Carson reached out to me as well. I believe they ended up not going with that model, though. So that as far as I'm aware, only Beverly Hills has a similar model to us. I can do some research and find out if other cities have passed something similar.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any legal challenge to the manner in which the tax was set up by the city of El Segundo. As Joe said, the city of Beverly Hills did a very similar tax. My opinion is that I think it's defensible what was done. Now, you know, a court can disagree, but I think the way it was set up was defensible. It just hasn't been done before. It hadn't been done in the state before, to my knowledge. We couldn't find any precedent for it. So there's always some risk when something hasn't been done before.
And just to add a little bit more context to that, when we did develop our measure, I did reach out to the Board of Equalization, and their attorneys looked at our measure that Mr. Hensley and his law firm put together. They provided some feedback, actually, that was incorporated in there. So at the time, the Board of Equalization attorneys thought that our measure was fine as well. Okay, utility user tax, also known as UUT. It's a tax imposed on utility services. It's authorized by Government Code Section 37100.5. It can be a general tax, again, that unrestricted, just a simple majority, or a special tax restricted. Nearly all UUTs that have been enacted in the state of California have been enacted as a general tax. Here's El Segundo's current rate structure, and it's only on business commercial accounts, so that we do not have a UUT on residential accounts. So gas is 3%, electric 3%, water 3%, and then telecom 2%, and prepaid wireless 1.5%. Now, I'm not sure why the difference there in the rate structure, but that's how it was passed at the time.
Joe, is that
Sir.
unusual to only have commercial? When I look at this table of the other cities in LA County, it doesn't, that I can tell, it doesn't distinguish residential versus commercial. So would they have the same rates for both then?
So it does. The distinguishment there is if it has the letter N, so N like Nancy, that means it's on commercial only.
I see.
So you'll see El Segundo, City of Monterey Park, City of Vernon.
Okay, so it's the norm, because Vernon's almost all commercial. I mean, it's the exception, not the norm.
Right,
Then R means it's residential only?
correct. And you'll
Okay.
see there's three or four cities there that have residential only, but vast majority have both. And then, council, that is your attachment D in your packet. Okay, so as I just referenced that, attachment C in your packet is the listing of cities within LA County that have a UUT. And that attachment C is listed by high to low. So the highest being the city of Culver City at 11%. And you can see going all the way down to 2%, and we're, El Segundo's at the bottom as well.
What's the I've never quite understood the tax on the utilities. How did that, like, what's the origin, what's the logic behind that tax?
I don't know if Mr. Hensley can probably provide more insight than I can on that. But.
It's a matter, I think it's just one of many ways of imposing a tax on residents and businesses, and it's also a way of imposing a tax that's based upon some consumption level, and also it has a built-in CPI, if you will, because as those underlying rates get increased, and it's a percentage tax, the amount gets increased. I don't know if there's anything magical behind it.
Could it encourage, so if you had a higher UUT, theoretically, it could encourage people to look at alternative energy, solar, et cetera, potentially?
Yeah, I think with regard to electricity, and that's potential. With regard to water, people might cut back on usage. On wastewater, we have to check with HDL, but I doubt that would have much impact on that.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as I understand the derivation of the utility user tax, it goes back many decades, had to do with the use of public right-of-way for those utilities. So it was the telephone or gas or electric lines, they were using public right-of-way, and that was a way to compensate the local government for the use of that right-of-way. That's the derivation. We could look it up. It probably goes back well over 100 years.
No, that's helpful, thank you.
So, Joe, I have one question on that. You know, we're considerably lower than everybody else in that. Is there any restrictions on how much you can raise that? And when was the last time we did raise our utility tax?
So I believe it was done through, Mark, is it Measure 8, A? I believe that's what it was done through. I'll have to research that. But I know it's been on the books for quite some time.
But is there any restrictions from how much of a percentage you can go up? Like, is there, like, you can go from 2% to 10% or 2% to 5%? Like, there's no restriction?
There's no restrictions. The voters have to approve it.
Yeah.
As far as there being a cap, we're not sure. There is a cap in state law. We will gladly look into that.
Yeah, I'm not aware of one. There's a pretty wide range of, which Joe will probably cover, of the percentages that cities charge.
Yeah, and you can see in LA County, as I mentioned, Culver City is the highest at 11%. So as far as I know, there's not a cap on it.
And how much money if we went up for each percentage, how much money would that equal?
Great question. So I'm going to go back to these slides, but so this slide depicts every 1%. So if you go to the far right, every 1% on commercial business will raise about $2.1 million. Just go over to the left one column, if 1% were assessed on residential, it would generate just under 400,000.
And Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the second column on revenue source, so cities are all over with respect, they're all over the map with respect to which utilities they charge the tax to. I believe, I don't have it in front of me, but Culver City, I think, does all of them. But there's a mixture. And telecommunication, that's the phone one, correct? So that's
Correct.
Domestic and international calls, and also wireless, I believe. So there is a variety.
Correct. The most common is phone, wireless, electric, gas, and water. There's a handful of cities that are adding video, like streaming video. So our UUT does not cover live streaming video or like these video apps that you can watch different movies or TV shows through. And then some cities also include wastewater and trash. Very few, but there are some.
And again, it's important to understand that the derivation is the use of the right-of-way.
So Joe, one more thing on this, on the grid that you put up here, the comparative analysis. I now understand the N and the R, you know, what they residential versus non. So the ones that don't have anything next to it, is that strictly commercial?
No, it's residential, commercial, both assess the same rate.
Oh, so they're double dipping on that. So it's residential and commercial on the ones that are not indicated.
Correct. Correct. So that's the vast majority of municipalities.
Gotcha.
Just have a UUT on
Understood.
the different services, water, electric, and they don't differentiate between whether it's a commercial or residential account.
So on trash, I know there's only a couple examples, so now that our residents are paying part of the trash, that would be a UUT on top of that bill that they're paying the city? That they're reimbursing the
If
city?
that's what council
I'm
directed
just
us to
saying,
do.
if they,
That would be correct, yes.
Correct.
and sewer, how would that manifest?
So it'd be the same thing if we were to bring a tax
The water bill, I
measure.
guess.
So the water portion right now for commercial accounts, I'm just gonna make a number up. Let's say their water bill is 500 for the month. The UUT 3% is only applied towards the water, and let's say sewer is 100, that's not included in the UUT.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go over some average rates here, so,
I'm sorry, on the video,
yes, sir.
help us understand, how would the consumers see that tax?
So if you have like a Hulu, you're gonna have to forgive me because I don't watch the streaming videos, my kids do, but Netflix, any of those streaming videos, you pay a subscription service for that. And if the UUT ballot measure included language, which a lot of cities are doing that now, that subscription service would just charge, so like Netflix would have to charge the UUT and remit that to the city. Okay, so average UUT rates for LA County, and this is for businesses, business rate only, it's about 6% on all of them. And very similar for residential, it's about 6%. So El Segundo is about half of the average city UUT rate in LA County.
Joe, what's the private column? It says private like private communications or something maybe?
So the first 1, 2, 3, 4 lines are related to phone and different formats of phone, whether it's wireless, international, interstate. Private comm, I'm not exactly sure how it's defined, but it is related to
Phone.
telecommunications.
Okay. So to your point earlier, if we said we're interested in the UUT and we had the 4 votes, your staff would come back, dig into this further, understand what that private comm was, and give us
Yes,
more detailed options, okay?
right, that is correct. So again, yes, we would need 4 of the 5 council members to say move forward with this. Yeah, we've touched on this already, so I'm gonna skip that slide. One example, I just want to throw this out there as an example. So we do have this different rate structure currently There's 3%, 2%, 1.5%. If, as an example, we said we wanted to streamline that and just make it 3.5% across the board on business only, that would generate about 1.8 million per year in new revenue. So again, I'm going to come back to this, but the UUT policy options are status quo, no action. Expanding utility, 2 would be expanding utility service categories to be taxable, for example, the streaming services, wastewater, refuse collection. 3, direct staff to look into pursuing an increase of the current business UUT rate. And then 4, direct staff to look into pursuing setting a new rate for residential UUT. So it could be one of those, it could be a mixture of them, it could be all of them. BLT, and again, I do want to stress here on the BLT, this is a very complex tax measure. So what you see in front of you, it's just an example. And if you instructed staff to come back, we would obviously bring a detailed tax measure back to you. The BLT is a tax imposed on businesses for conducting business within the city, authorized by California Government Code Section 37101. And the BLT can be for revenue purposes or regulatory purposes. El Segundo has it for revenue purposes. Our business license tax is not regulatory by nature. And again, this is just an example. Some of the revisions that we could do is create a small business incentive or exemption. And again, this is just an example. A business generating less than $25,000, and we can add other parameters that only has 1 employee or 2 employees, less than 1,000 square feet or 2,000 square feet. Could be determined by City Council, and then an annual gross receipts would be exempt from the BLT tax and fees associated with the BLT tax. So that's just one example. Revision of sales tax and the penalty tax credit. So we do have the sales tax credit. So any businesses that generate sales tax within the city, they're allowed to use a percentage of that tax generated. I believe it's up to 30% of the annual amount that they produce, and they're allowed to offset their BLT by up to 40%. So that's costing a city right now, it fluctuates year to year, on average 1.1 to 1.2 million per year. And it's for businesses that are, any business, it could be aerospace, it could be restaurants. In fact, many restaurants don't even pay BLT because their sales tax credit can completely reduce it. So that would be one revision that we would want to put into the tax measure if council did want to move forward with this. And then we could either phase out the sales tax credit over a period of several years, or if council said, no, this is eliminated right away, we could do that as well. Eliminate the late penalty credit. So if a business is late paying their business license tax, they are allowed to use the portion that the penalty was assessed on them and apply that towards their next year's BLT. And for instance, we had a large corporation in 2019 pay late, and they were allowed to offset their 2020 business license tax by over $200,000 because of the late penalty they paid the prior year. So we would, look at maybe eliminating that late penalty. We would also look at redefining business types and categories. Our code is very outdated. It was originally designed from the 40s and 50s, so there's many business models that don't exist anymore, and some of them are circuses, Wild West shows, et cetera. We would eliminate those and then add the shared economy business type models, so virtual offices, shared rides, et cetera. So we would update the code there as well. Again, if the council wanted to move forward, it would require 4 members of the city council to approve that. BLT measure on the ballot would be 50% plus 1 of voters' approval. Depending on what council instructed us to revise, it could generate 1.3 to 1.5 million per year. Most of that would be eliminating the sales tax credit or phasing it out. And updating our current language in the code, and then updating the methodology used to calculate the BLT. So again, the actions there would be status quo, no action, or direct staff to look into pursuing a revision of the current business license tax structure and ordinance. Okay, parking tax. Parking
Question
tax.
on the small business piece, it says for instance on this, is an annual gross income of $25,000 or less?
Yes.
Is that, I mean, that would seem to disqualify probably a huge number of our small businesses, right?
Yeah, that was just an example.
Just example, got it, okay.
Right, right, I'm so,
I'll put a sock
you
in.
know,
You got it.
city council say, no, we don't want that, or it's 5,000, or, I mean, so we would come back with details and many options, and then you would give us direction on exactly what to put on the ballot. Okay, so, parking tax imposed on occupants of non-residential off-street parking spaces within the city. And this is authorized by Government Code Section 37100.5. And it may be imposed as a general tax, unrestricted, or a special tax restricted, depending on how you want to structure the tax measure. The parking tax is imposed on occupant of off-street parking spaces. And this is not residential. So if there's, let's say, condo complex that has a parking structure, that would not be assessed. The parking tax is collected by the owner or operator of the paid parking facilities and remitted to the city by the parking operator. Typically, the tax is based on a percentage of the amount charged for the parking. And currently, there are 17 cities in California that have a parking tax. LA, San Francisco are the largest ones. LA collects about $112 million a year. San Francisco, $84 million a year. And Oakland and San Diego, and there's some other cities, most of them that obviously have airports near them.
So can you ask, how many actually spaces do we know that are for airport parking in our town proper? Like how many facilities are being used for airport parking?
So we're estimating a little over 4,600 parking spaces that could be assessed the parking tax. With an average daily rate of $20 that those facilities are currently charging. If we had a 10% parking tax rate, it could generate about $1.7 million per year. And that's, you know, it's a conservative figure. It could be a little bit higher. So we're assuming about an 80% occupancy rate of those parking spaces.
So this is not just hotels, is this also employers and commercial buildings that are charging for parking?
That is correct, right. So the status quo there would be obviously no parking tax, or council direct staff to look into pursuing a parking tax measure. Cannabis tax.
Joe, did your staff, I don't see it in the presentation I saw, but have you considered other parking revenue? Like streets with the new technology, you don't have to put meters in place anymore, or our public parking lot, for example?
Absolutely, that's something that the city council wanted us to pursue. We would look at that. I know many cities now, they have these smart parking meters. You'll have one central kiosk. You go in there, put all your information.
Or you just
pay.
scan a QR code.
Right, yep.
Redondo Beach is set up that way now. And
Correct. Yeah, and if council wanted us to look at, you know, the parking meter revenue, certain section of town, or, you know, wherever, we would look into that. I have not done research on that to date, though.
So that I understand the 4,000 spots that you had listed, that includes, if I'm a landlord, I rent a business X gets 50 spots with that they pay for as part of their rent, then we would assess a tax on those 50 spots?
Yes, that is correct.
So that indirectly becomes a second business tax, because that's gonna be directly passed on to the
Right.
lessor.
No, we can have
Unless-
exemptions. You know, if you only want it for transient parking, we can do that. You can structure the tax measure however you would like.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the city of Burbank, when they started their 10% parking tax in the late 90s, Joe, you'd have to go back and confirm it's still the case. I believe they exempted out like the businesses. It was mainly for those associated with the airport. So there might have been some changes in the law on how that, the extent to which you can do exemptions, but my memory is they were able to exempt out the businesses.
Now, if we did parking tax and parking revenue, could we specify where those funds would be used, like additional parking capacity, restriping Smoky Hollow, transportation? But that would require the 2/3, or how would that play out?
If you specify where the funds must be spent, then that's considered a special tax.
2/3.
2/3.
Correct.
Okay.
Another way you can do it is say it's for general infrastructure. And Mark, let me know if I'm kind of, or for the city's general fund, and have an oversight committee. And that oversight committee can kind of help decide where some of those funds get spent. Is that one option, Mark, that some cities have set up?
Yeah, I've seen cities do advisory taxes, set up oversight committees. They still are general funds, and I think there's advantages and disadvantages to doing that kind of a arrangement, but that gets into more policy type issues.
Right.
All right, just so we're clear, the 4,000, can you again help us understand what was included in that? What type of parking facilities? Was it residential, or did you say no residential?
No, it does
I
not.
don't know if
include
Chris was bringing up a residential or a commercial example, but.
No, that was a commercial example.
Commercial, I guess. So if they're charging the lessees, and the lessee is passing that cost on, then there would be a tax on that.
Correct,
Okay.
but all residential would not be included.
So it's commercial, you're including all employers, all parking structures commercially, as well as do we still have in the hotels, and do we still have Parking 105 in town, or did they move? They used to be right on PCH on the north side of the street. It was airport parking?
Oh, yeah, the big building, yes. Yeah, for sure.
Okay, because that's the only one I know of that's LAX specific for the airport in town.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would just say this, if you're interested in exempting out certain types of uses, we will research the ability to do that. I believe there's some flexibility. And then in addition, Joe, what I'm hearing is we should look at researching smart parking meter, the concept in some areas.
I
Right?
think we'd have to vote on that probably. That was just something.
Oh, yeah, we'll put that on the list, and then you'll decide
Yeah,
whether or not you want to do that. Okay.
Okay, cannabis tax. So California voters formally passed Proposition 64, November 2016. Prop 64 legalized recreational cannabis products, use, sale, distribution, manufacturing, cultivation, testing, and delivery. This is at the state level. About $2.8 billion in sales from recreation marijuana in California since 2018. $1.4 billion in excise tax to the state, $1 billion in sales tax, $347 million in cultivation tax. And there are about just under 9,200 cannabis business licenses issued in California. And that was as of January 2021. Now, I'm sure there are some businesses operating not legally, but those are the businesses that are doing it legally. So the options here are explore adding cannabis tax options. And I know there's going to be an item on the city council meeting, I believe it's November 2nd, talking further about the cannabis issue in El Segundo. So one, this requires an affirmative vote, again, of 4 of the 5 city council members. It would be a general tax, so 50% plus 1 from the voters, and it may generate $600,000 to $1.3 million for the general fund. And this is a handout in your packet, and this is just an example of some cities in LA and Orange County that have a local tax on manufacturing, distribution, retail, cultivation, and testing. You see there's different rates. Carson obviously has the highest rate, 18%, and that's on top of the state's rate. And then Culver City is what we highlighted just to kind of, they were what we considered a little bit more moderate. So I believe that's what we used to project our revenues.
So, and remind us, the state tax rate has changed, you said earlier.
So it was originally passed as 15%, and I believe the state legislator and the governor signed something amending that, and I'll have to get that for you, Mayor.
Okay, but that's the only tax, there's a state tax of, let's call it 10% now, and then Culver City, as an example, is 6%. So the total tax, because there's no federal tax outside of income tax on this.
Right,
So the total tax is 16% to the business?
correct, correct, in Culver City.
Plus, would they also be paying a BLT? If you looked at El Segundo, assuming we
Yes.
went forward,
In El Segundo,
so you'd have
yes,
the BLT tax, maybe some UUTs,
correct,
this tax, payroll tax, okay.
correct, right. Yeah, and you asked about federal taxes, so at the federal level, that is still a banned substance.
To that end, if the administration, if they go forward with legalizing marijuana, is there likely to be a federal tax on it? Is there any
I
precedent
would
for that?
imagine they
can't-
would.
Okay.
I don't
Because
know.
are there taxes on tobacco at the federal level? Or is that just state?
I will have to
Okay, I'd be curious to know.
research that for you.
I think there are limitations on the federal government's ability to do those type of taxes that cross state lines. We'll find out.
Yep. Okay, so here's just an example. If El Segundo were to assess taxes, cannabis tax on distribution, retail, testing, cultivation, manufacturing, how we're getting to this amount of between 600,000 and 1.3 million.
Which one is Culver City, is based on Culver City, the conservative or the moderately aggressive?
The conservative.
Okay.
The city council, just by way of reference, Mark Hensley's firm, they're the city attorney to Bellflower, and they have this, I believe theirs is around 10%, is that right? And they generate $3 million a year. So the retail tax for that city is 10%, and then they have different amounts for other components. So just FYI, they're generating $3 million a year.
And how many locations?
I think it's 4 or 5, right?
I believe it's 4.
Okay.
Yeah, they do have a residential population of about 60,000 in Bellflower. And I think a
Some of
little
that
bit
is
more.
also in permit fees and regulatory fees, so it's a combination of funds.
All right, so the options there are no cannabis tax, status quo, or direct staff to look into pursuing cannabis tax and regulatory fees.
Oh, and,
Can I just ask, I mean, so Carson's at high, and they're pretty much 18% across the board, other than test, yeah, 18, other than cultivation. Is that like, is that so to say, hey, okay, you can have it here, but we're gonna tax it? Is it kind of to push, like, what's the purpose of?
I mean, the consumer would make a decision, do I want to pay, a higher
18%.
price for the same product that, can drive outside of Carson and get it somewhere a little bit cheaper? It's really up to the consumer. And a lot of cities were doing that too, to discourage the purchase of that. But my personal opinion, if someone's going to buy it, it's prevalent all over the place now, so you can drive just about anywhere and get it.
That's why I was wondering if it's a discouragement.
Yeah, and then what about, is there a way to capture delivery point of sales for taxation? So if you're in Carson and you're getting it delivered to you, are you still paying 18% or not?
I will have to look at that.
yeah, it might be the.
Because we know that's already
sale.
happening here in El Segundo. We've seen the data on that already.
That'd be an interesting SBOE question, but it's usually it's the point of sale where the tax is, and there's certain types of transactions like buying a car or home improvement or home construction, that's based on the site. So if any of you go to Orange County and you buy a car, you're gonna pay the sales tax based on where your zip code is, where you live, not where you buy the car. There's certain unique situations. I don't know how it works with cannabis. So if it's delivered, to answer the question, Council, I don't know what the rate would be on the delivery, if it's based on where it's coming from. If we don't have a tax, we're not getting it here. We'll have to research that one.
Yeah, I can reach out to these cities and ask if that's something that they're assessing, or if it's something that's not allowed per the state code.
And just last one question, so if we decide to put a tax on cannabis, is there a threshold or a limit of how much you could tax it at?
Well, I think if you tax it so high, the consumer would probably choose not to
But I mean,
purchase it from them.
legally, we could put 50% tax.
Yeah, to answer the question, we're not aware of a limitation by federal or state action. We'll have to look at that one. That's another addition to our research list. But we would say this, maybe this is an obvious point, if we tax it too high, we just drive people to other stores, yeah.
So just to sum it up, and then we'll go back to each of those items. I skipped one here. All right, sum it up. You have a menu of options here. We know that there's a great need for any of these revenue sources for infrastructure. So sales tax, again, 3 to 9 million, UUT 1.8 to 2 million, parking tax would be about 1.7, business license 1.3 million to 1.5 million, cannabis tax 600 to 1.3 million. So you have an option here, anywhere from 8.4 to 16.3 million if you decided to go with all of them, or individual ones. You can see what those dollar amounts are. Some other options that I just threw out there. So, I mean, we can go on and on about all the options, but here's some other options that are commonly used by other municipalities. General obligation bonds, or GO bonds. That's in the form, it does have to go to the voters. It's in the form of a parcel tax. So, for instance, if you wanted to do a GO bond for, roads or park infrastructure, that's something that council does have a tool. That would have to go before voters, and that is assessed in the form of a parcel tax.
Well, technically, it's based on value, right? It'd be a percent.
Yeah, assessed value.
Yeah.
Certificates of occupation, COPs, that's also a financing mechanism that council has, kind of like our POBs. COPs, so that doesn't generate new revenue, but you can bond. And at today's low interest rates, let's say we wanted to move forward with certain infrastructure, go out there in the marketplace and bond for a certain dollar amount. You would have all the funds up front at low interest rate that we got in the POBs to 2.56%, and then you would have the funds readily available to move forward with the infrastructure projects. We would have to dedicate a certain portion of our general fund revenues moving forward, though, to make that bond payment. Community facility districts, CFDs, those are set up by property, so it's not necessarily a tax measure on the ballot, but you do have to get the property owners within whatever that district is. Let's say Smoky Hollow, you wanted to set up a CFD for a BID, Business Improvement District. You would have to go to those property owners, get them to approve it, and then they would be assessed certain value based on whatever it is that we're trying to set up. So whether it's a BID, a lighting district, a landscape maintenance district, you can do that both in the business and the residential arena. Paramedic subscription service, so there's a handful of cities that do this. I know the city of San Marino is one of them. I believe City of Vernon is another one, where they charge their residents a annual paramedic subscription service, and that covers any time that resident needs to call for whether it's the paramedics or for fire service. And then you also have a parcel tax option. This is a straight parcel tax. So these are some other common options that municipalities use. The next step, and we'll go back to each of these items here in a minute. Council to give staff direction on which tax measures to pursue, placing on the November 2022 ballot. The measures will then be developed and brought back for city council discussion during the timeframe of February to April 2022. And then any ballot measure would need to be finalized and approved by city council no later than June 21, 2022. And I put that date on there because I'm assuming, just like in 2021, July was blacked out, so I just made that assumption. But if you do have meetings in July, then we could also push this out to July. But you would need to do that in order to place the ballot measure on the November 2022 general election. So really, for tonight, we're just looking for direction on council. Do you want staff to further research and develop options with any of these measures, and then bring it back to council sometime February, March of next year?
So Joe, I have one other one, with the passage of SB 9 and SB 10 and potential enhanced density in single-family homes. That will put a real big tax on our parks and recs. So how do we identify, is there a way that we could look at our current parks to resident ratio and then determine what that, come up with a set ratio that we say we were at X, and any additive, a reduction of that ratio as these expanded, high density comes in, they have to pay a tax to either or offset additional parks or bring in additional parks to keep that ratio at that same number, or pay a fee to help enhance our current facilities.
So I believe that we do that through what's called our development impact fees. And we have that study going on right now, and that is proposed to be brought to city council the January meeting.
Are we looking at our current ratio, and then to keep that ratio static, so that when there's expansion, they either have to enhance the green space somewhere, somehow, on their facility, on their land, or we can charge a fee to help enhance our existing, so that at least our parks and rec facilities are,
Right.
maintained and can accommodate the expanded density.
Yeah, so the way the development impact fees is, it's, the city's charging a fee to the developer, exactly, to fund these type of items. So there's not we don't have a requirement on, they have to keep X green space unless it's in the development agreement
But
itself.
can we do that? Can we add that? That's what I'm asking.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to make sure that we have some type of set standard in our city for park space.
Yeah.
And I want to figure out how to maintain that standard. And then if there is a request to reduce that standard, what does that mean? How do we maintain that standard?
Okay.
If I can interject? Mr. Mayor, members of the council, it's a great question. Item number 10 on your agenda is an update on the SB 9 housing legislation. And the answer to the question is yes. So SB 9 does allow for the continuation of impact fees. So there's going to be new housing units added in El Segundo. Those housing units will have to pay their fair share of impact on the park system. And if you would like clarity and a review of how the park fees are calculated and what that means in terms of new green space or enhancements to existing green space, we can provide that. But you do have the authority to do that.
And an updated development impact fee study, like I said, is coming to city council in January. So we haven't updated our fees. I believe it was 13, 14 years ago. So this study's much needed. It's actually part of the strategic plan under Goal 5. So we kicked this off several months ago. It is about a 6-7 month process, and we'll have it done sometime in January.
And then the last thing I had on the business tax, we have, we were talking about, I know when Drew and I got on council, about looking at our business tax as a whole. So one of the big components that our current business tax is based on number of employees. And we have, given the new giga business that's, expanding, especially here in El Segundo, companies are not really paying their fair share because they don't really have the employees, or they have, especially given with COVID, and there's employees out, across the, remote. How do we ensure that every company is paying their fair share?
So we actually base it off of payroll from that site. Because that was one of the items that we were worried about during COVID with telecommuting. And we had,
But if a company is making quite a bit of revenue without a lot of employees, which is the new gig system,
Yes.
Like a Facebook would be a good example of that,
exactly.
or an Uber, because everybody's a contractor. How do we capture the proper appropriate fees or taxes?
So we would include that, so these new business models that exist, we would include that in the business license tax revision.
And then I promise my last question. So if we decided to do a UUT, like an increase in the UUT, could we do a multi-year assessment? Like, so increase by 1% for fiscal '23, but also when we go out to the voters, it includes another additive jump in 5 years so that there's a continual growth, so we don't have to keep going back to the voters?
That's a great question.
And it can be structured that way, so long as it's approved by the voters that way.
Because I think this is one of the problems with the city, is that we have to keep going to the voters, and it's laborious, it's costly, but if we know these things are gonna continue to escalate, maybe we put some benchmarks in there so we can have triggers, and we can decide, do we wanna apply that trigger or not apply that trigger, but at least that they're already in place for increases in taxes. Like we could, it's kind of similar to, we can maybe put it on the onus of the council to actually initiate the trigger or not initiate the trigger.
Staff would have to research that to confirm it's an option.
Okay, any other questions or comments from council? Yes.
One question just for clarification for all those viewers at home. You referenced 50% plus one numerous times. Is that of registered voters or of number of voters who actually cast votes?
Of number of voters who cast votes.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, just to maybe expedite the process a little bit, I'm not going to go through all the motions, but I would like to move approval of staff researching a parking tax, which would include a parking revenue management system, AKA meters, but the technology variety, the business license tax overhaul, which to Carol's point, we've been talking about for 5 years up here, and the cannabis tax research. So just the parking tax and revenue management, business license tax, and cannabis tax.
Is it maybe easier to go take them one by one? Because we each may have a slightly different bundle. So it may be easier to
Okay.
go down some of the.
Okay, so let's go through sales tax. Someone like to make a motion to approve staff researching a sales tax measure? Doesn't look like it. Okay.
Yeah, I will. I'll make a motion.
Oh,
to
you will?
approve that.
Okay. Do we have a second on that? Okay. Nothing on sales tax. Okay, thank you, Councilmember Drew. Utility user tax.
I'd like to make a motion on utilities user tax for corporations,
Okay, do we have a second?
Was that just for corporations?
just for,
We already have UUT for non-residential.
non-residential.
So you want them to explore an increase of the non-residential
Correct.
UUT?
Because right now we're at number 2%,
Mhm.
and we're low, at the bottom of the barrel. And at 1%, which would actually still keep us at the bottom of the barrel, brings us $2 million?
But you're not interested in exploring it for residential, just commercial?
No, just commercial.
Should we discuss these things, the pros
Sure,
and cons?
yeah.
I mean, I feel like
Yeah.
if you're sitting here and you're
Yeah.
in between two thoughts.
We're just exploring it, we're not saying we're doing it, we're just exploring it.
I understand, staff's time is precious,
Yeah.
so it's good to understand like what type of support it has, if it has a lot of support, if it has minimal support. And, because my thought and the reason I asked my question, I'm sorry, I know there's a motion on the
No, I can retract
on the
that.
floor. No, it's okay. I mean, we can discuss between motions, right, Mr. Mayor?
Absolutely.
All right. You know, we're one of the only residential cities surrounding that doesn't have a UUT. I mean, at one point I read something about the difference between if you live just on the other side of the airport, the same cable bill or the same electric bill or the same water bill, and the difference in the cost. And, you know, I think we all know what business I'm in, and I have people that move here from other places, and they're like, I cannot believe El Segundo does not have a UUT on residential. Like, how is it that, you know, it's gonna cost me an extra $2 a month? You know, this is nothing, but it brings so much revenue to the city.
Well, I think it was only $500,000, if that's what you had said.
About 400,000.
Yeah, so it's not very.
Well, that was just for 1 point.
Yeah,
And
for every
right now you're at
1%.
0. So if
Yeah.
you went to 3, that's 1.2 or 1.5 or something.
And in perpetuity with the cost of those services going up, right? So I think it'd be worth it to explore it for residential as well. You know, I think we look to the businesses to bail us out a lot, and I shouldn't say bail us out, but the businesses carry the lion's share of, you know, the tax burden here in town. And, you know, if staff was to come back and say, this is what it would cost each residential household per month, you know, I think that would be worth us looking at and then deciding, is this something we want to put on there?
So, Councilmember Nichol, I do have the 1% right now for the average residential household would pay $55 a year for the 1%.
One of the things, though, I guess you gotta look at is that, obviously, we had enough meetings about it, a huge increase in water, wastewater, right? So you already have an increase in rate that people are paying. We just added the trash tax, if you wanna call it that, or the fee. So that's something that's also very recent. Would we be able to look at this and pick and choose out of that number for residential, so it's not double dipping on top of what's already been put in there, in addition to the corporations or the commercial?
Yes, you can choose which utilities you want assessed.
So if we're putting as a motion to.
We don't
just
have a
do
second
no
yet,
s-
so
oh,
she could choose to amend her motion, or we can have a substitute motion. There's not a second for the original.
We could run with hers on the commercial, and then someone could make a motion for residential following that, right?
Yeah, or you could make a substitute motion, maybe get a second for it.
So, okay, then, no offense, Ms. Burstick,
It's
but
okay.
I will make a substitute motion to direct staff to explore UUT for both commercial and residential, giving us some numbers of the averages of our surrounding area on the UUT for residential.
And for commercial, because we're
And
way far
commercial,
below
yes.
everybody else on commercial as well.
So
Did you
there's a
want to
motion.
second that, Lance, or?
I'll second it.
Okay. All right. Madam Clerk, I believe we need 4 out of 5 to move approval on this one.
Can I get clarification on that real quick?
Yeah.
So, Mr. Hensley, is it 4 out of 5 to move forward with the study, or 4 out of 5 to place it on the ballot?
Takes the majority of the council to direct staff to do something, but it would require 4 to actually place it on the ballot, so
Okay.
it'd be up to
3.
council to determine if you don't have 4 people to potentially support it, whether you still want the information. That's a,
Well, but we could go forward with 3, it sounds like. People could get the information,
For
decide, yeah,
studying
that makes sense,
purposes,
and get the
yes.
4 or 5.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So 3 to pass. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Drew,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel,
No.
Mayor Boyle.
No. All right, that one moves forward. We've got parking tax. I'll restate what I said, is I believe there should be a parking tax. And I also believe that we should have a parking revenue system in place for the city. And I'd like to make a motion to have staff research both.
Nichols, second.
Okay, that one's clear, right, Joe? Before we go to a vote? Okay, Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
No.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
4-1.
Thank you. Okay, business license tax. Anyone like to just make a motion or discuss this one?
Can we take this in a couple pieces?
Yeah.
For instance, like, I would, from the start, make a motion that we ask staff to research removing the sales tax credit.
I'll second that.
Okay,
First
we're gonna
and
vote on that one separately, Madam Clerk, whenever you're ready.
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
And Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
That's a 5-0.
And then I would like to make a motion to remove the business license tax, offset for future payment.
Pimentel, second.
Okay, Madam Clerk, whenever you're ready.
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem
Yes.
Pimentel. Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
All right, anything else on the BLT besides Mayo?
So my only question was about the number of employees that, how do we address the change in the business types that are here in town to accommodate not just charging by employee?
Yeah, so we would have to research that and come back with proposals to the city council.
So I'd like to make a motion to move forward with looking at changes in business environments, because currently we're just based off of employee, for them to come back with some solution or some offering of how we can capture that type of tax.
Well, some of it's on square footage and employee.
Yeah.
So what, I mean, just for legal and probably staff purposes, what, so there's more definition, what type of specificity or categories are you thinking about that we might break it up further? And it potentially can be, I just be helpful to understand what that might mean.
Well, I would like for them to get, I mean, obviously there's cities out there that are doing different types of taxes. If they could come and give us some suggestions or some ideas, because I feel like right now we're penalizing people to hire people. We're penalizing businesses to hire people and have bigger footprints, when that's not necessarily what we want.
Yeah, one of the other models that's used by mainly larger cities, but other cities, is gross receipts tax. And there are, you know, pluses and minuses to that, but it is one of the other models. City of LA, Long Beach,
Glendale.
Glendale, there are a number of cities that go off of gross receipts. But there are different taxes on different types of industries in certain cities, where you tax certain industries higher than you do others. So there are various different models.
I think the tax code is more than due for an update. And I'm sort of comfortable lending or giving you the freedom to run with some creativity. And I think as long as we have a bit of the agreed rules of the game, that we are the county's most business-friendly city for a reason, and the ideas that come out of our staff, I think, should reflect that, and not reflect hey, we've got some successful businesses, let's gouge them. which I don't think we're going that direction. But
So do we need a vote for direction to review that?
Yeah, I think someone should make a motion to, I think I hear Carol and Chris saying we need to look at the methodology. Not necessarily the fees, but at least the methodology for now. Is that what I'm hearing?
yeah, just that we're updated so we reflect 2020 and not 1980.
To make sure the methodology is as efficient and as equitable as possible.
And takes into consideration the trends that are happening all around us right now.
Okay, got it. So
Yeah.
efficiency, fairness, and dealing with the trends, for lack of a better
Right.
word.
So, okay, so Perstuck made the motion, Pimentel.
Second, Pimentel.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol.
Aye.
Councilmember Perstuck.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Pimentel.
Yes.
Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
Great. Anything further on the BLT for now? Okay, great. On to cannabis.
So my first question is, are we jumping the gun a little bit on this, or is this just a matter of we're gonna look into this to be prepared?
Yes,
Because obviously right now, we're gonna have you research something that's not allowed.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as I understand it, staff would research this, so we're ready to roll, shovel ready.
Didn't we already vote on that, though, at the last meeting? Didn't we already give direction to explore this?
Correct. You asked
Not
us-
explore legalizing cannabis, but if a voter initiative legalized cannabis, how we would have a mechanism to address the impacts in the fees.
Correct, and then we decided to roll that into this revenue study session. And we're getting a little bit more clarity now, if you're interested in this, to be shovel-ready, what would the rate be and that type of thing. So we have to do some research.
So technically, there could be a cannabis initiative on the ballot by whoever way possible, then at the same time, have a tax measure on that.
Yep.
Okay.
So it would say if the voters approve this legalization or the sales, then we have a rate that would go into effect.
As a, for instance, 2 years ago, the state of Mississippi voted by voter initiative to legalize cannabis with 0 ways to address all of the costs that a cannabis industry incurs, which is a disastrous turn of events.
There is, I'll share, council, I think I've shared with you individually in a prior position when I was a county administrator in Northern California. Yolo County was one of the early counties to allow for the cultivation and sale of, gotta be sure on the sale part, but the cultivation part. So they allowed it, but they didn't, and then they had to do extensive code enforcement, and management, but they did not have a revenue piece. And that county is still strapped trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah, that's the same formula, writ small. So I would say that we would almost be derelict if we did not pursue at least understanding how to try and compensate us for a voter-driven initiative that would legalize this. Otherwise, we're just left paying for an inordinate number of services that we have not allocated for.
That's correct.
Someone like to make a motion?
I will. Motion approved.
So
Okay.
moved, second.
Okay. Madam Clerk?
For clarification, that was Councilmember Giroux and Pimentel.
Correct.
Thank you. Councilmember Giroux.
Yes.
Yeah, that's I'm a
Yes.
little unclear. We voted on this the other night. Do you need us to double vote on it?
I think it's just adding clarity, so we'll note that we're gonna continue doing what we were directed to do, I suppose.
Okay, so we're done?
So do we need to prioritize these, Joe? Because we've given you quite a few initiatives. Do you need direction in prioritization?
I think that would come later when we come back with the outcome of all the research, right?
Well, I'm just saying, you know, we've given him 6 initiatives to research and develop. Yep, so I'm just concerned that, do you need a prioritization in that?
Well, the parking tax, I mean, I don't want to downplay it, but it's very simple. The UUT.
Parking revenue is not simple though, because remember, it's both of those.
Yes,
There's 2 components.
right.
I'm just saying, like, because, you know, time, obviously, you know, we have a window, and I just want to make sure that you have clear, like, we want to be successful and not, we don't want to be so mired in too many
That
initiatives
would be
that were not
helpful.
successful.
Well, what about the time, this is all, let's work backwards, I mean, from the ballot, that's what we're preparing for, correct?
Right,
So,
8 months.
8 months?
Yeah. Well, actually, almost 10. Things have to be due to the county about the first week in August. So sometime during the summer of 2022, this would all be getting finalized. So there's quite a bit of time to put this all together.
Okay. Well, and then also we may at some point decide, you know, putting all this on one ballot would be like a little overload, right? So we may want to stage it. So when you need for us to prioritize this, please, you know, maybe it's too premature, but at some point I'm sure you're going to ask us to prioritize initiatives.
Yeah, so the goal is to come back between February and April with all these measures, and then get council's further feedback, anything that we need to adjust, and which ones we want to move forward with. And then, as Mr. Hensley mentioned, you know, early August it has to be submitted to the county. So I had planned by June 21st, which is the second council meeting in June, to have the formal ballot measures brought before council to approve. So there's quite a bit of time, but this is a lot of work, definitely.
At this juncture, you do not need us to prioritize it.
Not at this time.
I think we're okay.
Did you want to point out that one other lingering one?
Sure. So I believe someone mentioned about the refuse fees that went up. I believe Councilmember Drew you mentioned that. So we are only collecting 75% of what residents should be paying. So the general fund is still subsidizing that 25%. And at some point in the future, staff will be coming back to council to ask to do a Prop 218 study, similar how we did for the water and wastewater. We'll be doing that for refuse, which the former Public Works Director, Ken Berkman, did with the 75% fee.
Is that for commercial refuse or for residential refuse?
Residential.
No.
Commercial is paying 100%, and that's separate. They get
Yeah,
billed
but we were
separate.
looking at franchising that, correct? Instead of having, right now it's free for all, and then we're looking to franchise?
That's another piece of the puzzle.
Right.
Right. Now, the council, under the prior Prop 218 process, you did adopt the ability to go up to the maximum rate being charged, but you then reduced it. So they can raise it up to, I have to go back and look at the language, but there is the ability, if the council wants to take away that.
I wouldn't prioritize it.
Yeah, we're not recommending it, but in listening to this tonight, that if we're
Wait,
doing our job.
neither am I.
I might differ on this, can you clarify that, please, Mark?
Yeah, the council approved the Prop 218 up to the level that the hauler was charging, but then you only implemented 75% of it. So you have the ability to impose the
That's
rest
right,
of
we
it.
wouldn't have to go back out then with the
No,
Prop 218,
no,
we would
you
just
have-
vote on the dais.
You just have to take away that,
218 passed at $20
right,
per residential unit.
right.
And then at the dais, when you were out in the hallway, right, 'cause you had to recuse yourself from that.
Right,
It was then deliberated and it was passed at $15 per household,
Well,
saving each household roughly $60 a year.
it was passed actually 20, and then you took a second action to reduce it temporarily to 15. So you can.
But there was no sunset on that 15.
No, but at any point, you could lift that without going back to
Correct.
the voters.
I probably can't weigh in on it, I forgot about that conflict, but what does that equate to in dollars, the 25% annually, roughly, going forward?
It was approximately $280,000 a year today in the current year budget.
Okay, thanks.
If I recall correctly, just to add color to this conversation, the way the math was backed into was what were our costs? What did we cover prior to the cost going up? Right, so there was a new delta, right, where we roughly paid $750,000 a year as a city for refuge. And then, okay, the cost went up, so that $15 per household pays the difference. So the city is not making any money on that $15 per household that we all pay as residents. It's just the residents are now paying the increase that we experienced when we went back out to bid and went with EDCO and the automated, 3-bin system. So that's how that came to be.
Okay, I got a question for you. One thing we didn't address is borrowing any funds. So, I would like us to entertain, either a GO bond or some other measure to pay for all this capital improvement. We got, looks like 60 million that we're aware of ahead of us. You said we're $100 million short, or what would you say the number was, Joe?
Over the next 20 to 30 years, it's a range of 150 to
But 5 to 10 million a year, I think you said, right?
Correct.
So I would, given the market we're in right now, I'd like to see the city, I'd like to make a motion to have staff research borrowing capacity of the city to fund some of these projects.
I'll second that.
Okay. Do we need to be any more specific in the type of instrument, or would you come back and lay out all the different options between the different financial instruments?
We could provide an array of options.
Okay.
And we
Was
have-
that $40 million inclusive of the plunge? The facility needs assessment?
I have a feeling it would.
No,
We'll have to look. Don't-
And it was
drawn a blank.
40 in 2018.
not from this.
It's
Not from
probably
this thing they
60
just
now.
gave us.
Plus there was more money. Can you go back to that slide, please?
And remember, if I remember correctly, that was without the parks facilities.
I think it was
This is
just
non-
facilities. It was just, yeah.
So the parks assessment was not part of that.
I think it included I think Jocelyn is in there. And I'm almost positive that the checkout building was in there. And the other,
I think your slide indicated it did not include the parks.
Well, let's have staff, when you come back, let's be clearer, because we'll have the other needs assessment of
No.
what the total picture looks
Yeah.
like.
That
Yeah.
needs assessment included the clubhouse, checkout building, Joslin Center.
Yeah.
It included all of that, because that $40 million needs assessment dates back to Ken Berkman's time.
Yeah, the rec park needs assessment for rec park only, that's a lot, it's tens of millions, and that'll come to you, I believe, the next meeting or the meeting after that, I forget, one of those two, and that'll be fully delineated just for that park.
yeah, my only point is I think some of those things, granted, they may be double counted, but by the same token, there's inflationary pressure that is not accounted for in it as well.
That's correct. We'll have a complete list for you, so it's much simpler. But the mayor's has a suggestion to look at bonding and capacity for that. So do we need direction from all of you to do that?
We just need, we need a second on the motion.
I did the second.
Oh, you did, sorry, okay.
On top, okay, so before we go any further, just to add some color commentary to that, I had a thought as well. And I didn't see it up there as one of the options, but, we have earmarked, we have a policy around the Topgolf revenue. And a certain portion of that Topgolf revenue goes directly to Parks and Recs every year, right? So what I've always been curious about is, is there some sort of, financial vehicle out there where we could borrow the money, which that portion that we've already earmarked can pay for the loan, because if we have to save that portion every year, we're chasing inflation, right? Whereas if we could borrow the money, say, fix Joslin Center, and then here it is, we have this revenue coming in from Topgolf annually to pay off that loan to fix Joslin Center.
And I think you have to pledge assets or revenue or both, right?
Correct. So you can pledge revenue anticipation bond. So that is a possibility.
So, yeah, I think Councilman Nichols got a great point, just laying out all the different options that, would be good. Okay, so do we have enough on this one to go to a vote? Anyone else? Okay, Madam Clerk?
So good, this is an assessment of the city's borrowing capacity.
That's correct.
It's sort of agnostic as to whether we're borrowing against future revenue or general obligation bond or.
Yeah,
Laying out all the options to borrowing capacity now to fund some of these projects, regardless of how we get there at this point.
Yeah, that's correct. We do have our financial advisor that can help us understand the current mechanisms and so on, yes.
I think we're ready for a vote.
Councilmember Drew,
Yes.
Councilmember Nichol,
Aye.
Councilmember Persack,
Yes.
Mayor Potem Pimentel,
Yes.
and Mayor Boyles.
Yes.
5-0.
Okay, are we done? I think we're done.
Actually, Drew, can I bring up
Yeah,
one thing
yeah,
here?
please.
And again, I'm probably, again, my first one of these, so I'm kind of a little out of sync a little bit on this, is that the 4 out of 5, when it actually goes to the ballot, right? So when I look at all the things that we just talked about, the only thing we were not 4 out of 5 on was a UUT. That is gonna take a significant amount of time to go through procedurally, am I correct on that? I mean, you have a lot on your plate right now that we've just given you.
Absolutely.
And I'm looking at things as I like to have a lot of information and be able to kind of narrow it down once I get there. I'm not, overly excited about any one of these. And UUT, I was about kind of 50-50 on it, but I just kind of want to see what the data look like. That being said, it has the least amount of chance of getting on a ballot between the 5 of us up here. So can we go back through that, or is it, bam, we voted on it and you're gonna have to go do that work now?
Well, that's why I was asking if we should prioritize it, because,
I would almost say to table this thing and get, and prioritize the other ones, because we seem to be all in sync on the other ones.
You could make a motion to do another vote. I mean, it's still on the agenda.
All right, I'm gonna do that, because I just think we just gave you an awful lot of work that's very important, and I think this will help in the prioritization process. So am I calling for a motion to revote on the utility user tax study?
I'll second that.
So that was done?
So,
Wait, so this is the motion to revote, and if this motion passes, then we revote?
No, this is a motion, Lance, correct me if I'm wrong here, but to not move forward with UUT.
The analysis.
Yes, actually, no, this is a motion to go forward with UUT and take the vote over again.
tell me what I gotta say in order for it not to
I
happen.
think the easiest thing to do is say, we're gonna revote on UUT, whether or not to go forward with UUT.
Okay, I would like to, we'll revote on UUT, whether or not to go forward with the UUT.
Okay,
Study.
I'll second that. Thank you, Councilmember Drew.
Are you ready? Councilmember Drew,
No.
Councilmember Nichol,
Still yes.
Councilmember Persack,
still yes.
Mayor Potem Pimentel,
No.
and Mayor Boyles.
No.
So 2-3.
Okay,
Fails.
thank you. Any other business on the agenda, Mr. Lilio, that we didn't cover?
No, not for me. Mr. Mitnick, anything else you would like to cover?
So we didn't go over the capital improvement, is this for?
That was there just by a point of reference.
Okay.
A council member requested we have it handy. Okay.
And we'll be, yeah, and we're, as far as prioritization of these things, that will come in our budgetary session?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, well, I just want to commend council. Our 5th strategic priority is to be fiscal stewards, and unlike some of our peers, the 87 peers in LA County, we didn't jump to raising revenues and taxes. So I want to commend everyone for doing that, and also staff for being creative in terms of continuing to reduce expenses of the city and work smarter. So thank you all. That concludes our session. We'll see you in a little bit.
Thank you.
Thank you.